From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Alexis, codename Doc Holiday Jackson. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. It's an exciting time of the week for us, folks. This is our listener mail program where we get to hear directly from the best part of the show. You, specifically you. We always conclude our episodes saying, hey, reach out to us, find us online, call us on the phone, send us an email, and we're not blowing smoke. We're going to hear about active fitness groups. We'll get a note from a Knoxvillian. We'll learn about some mysterious holes. And before we do any of that, we have a couple of voicemails we'd like to share with you.
I have so many questions about active fitness groups. And that just sounds like a group of people that's really active and they go out and they do fitness together.
Because I sure do. That part is true.
I know a lot of those. See them at the, what is it? There's the Orange Theory gym right around where I am. And see them doing that. All right. So let's jump first to a voicemail message from Tegray.
Hi. You can call me Tegray. I'm a PhD candidate at Florida State, and I study political science and international relations. And I just want to say I teach American foreign policy, and as a longtime listener of your show, it's hard not to devolve my class into discussions of all the shady stuff that the United States government has done overseas. But I'm a big fan of the show. Keep up the good work. I'm calling because I had a potential idea for a future episode. Recently, I had a talk at my university from Professor Danielle Dono. She's at University of Oklahoma on fraudulent election monitors. So, according to her, there's an international conspiracy going on about election monitors. These popped up a lot in international relations after the fall of the Soviet Union. What they do is they go into countries that are, developing democracies, and they monitor their elections. They then develop objective reports about, whether the election was free or fair, or whether there was some fraudulent activity going on. However, recently, there have been efforts uncovered that Russia has been spearheading a lot of fraudulent election monitors. These monitors are usually, kind of developed overnight, paid off by either the governments that they're monitoring or, Russia themselves. And they go in and say elections are free and fair when they weren't. But they always assign themselves really official-sounding names. So if you're a citizen of that country, it's hard to tell, whether or not this is legit, especially if your media is, not free and fair as well. So I know there's some work in terms of sources by Danielle Dono and her co-authors. There's also been a series of investigative journalism that looks at some of these kind of pop-up election monitors and tracks their finances and has found a lot of ties to Russia and other kind of shady governments as well. So anyways, I thought this might be of interest. Of course, I'm a political scientist, so my interests are a little bit more niche, but I hope to see this in a future episode. Thanks. Bye.
Yes, well, thank you, Tegray. That's amazing. It's awesome to hear a PhD candidate at Florida State that's teaching international relations. My goodness. And this is something that we have had our eyes on for a long time. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, Ben and Noel, right? Specifically election monitoring and kind of the fishiness that can occur there when it's a third party or an NGO or some other group that goes into a country to verify in some way that this election is good to go, you guys, especially when it's a paid group, right? Because the money flows from somewhere for some reason. If it's not just some some pro-democratic group that is just all good and only working for good in the world.
The good folks at Wagner want you to vote your conscience.
Yeah. But they would never say that. Would never say at Wagner. It would be some other group. I don't know. Have you guys heard anything about this, or been specifically just, do you know much about the election monitoring process that's in place right now?
Yeah, this is fantastic. Tigray, thank you for reaching out to us. We share similar interest. Especially appreciate your recommendation to our fellow conspiracy realist about Professor Dono's work. The idea here in specific seems to be a conspiracy to legitimize corrupt elections. Election monitoring is an at times controversial industry. The Carter Center, based here in Atlanta, Georgia, sends groups across the world to monitor elections. We know people who work in election monitoring. However, we see in this industry, we do see opportunity for conspiracy and corruption. I mean, it's weird because there is an arguably condescending framework for Americans looking at the elections in other countries. The Americans say this election needs to be investigated, but never our own, because we're so great.
Yeah. I'm looking at outfits like the Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights, based, at least it looks like it's based out of Poland. Maybe, yeah, it is. It's based in Warsaw, Poland, that do this very thing, right? Go into other countries and monitor elections for theoretically the good of everyone. And they've got something called the OSCE, which I'm just finding a handbook on it. Maybe it's just because I've already searched for it. OSCE, called the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which is a whole other thing. Again, like some of this stuff, just in looking at it, in the moment here after listening to that message, there's no way for me to dive, or at least me personally, to dive into all of the stuff we need to talk about. Mm-hmm. But y'all, I found a handbook for that Office of Democratic Institutions and Human Rights that goes over like how to make sure an election is good to go, or at least on the up and up. Wow, there's a lot here.
Mm-hmm. And to be clear, folks, election monitoring is a necessary process. There are tons of corrupt elections around the world every year. That is not a hot take. That is simply true. The question then becomes something like, who watches the watchman?
Yeah.
That's not a dated reference.
No, it's not. But legitimately, is there something like that? Is there some kind of third party that comes into the United States and monitors our elections?
Do you mean like consensually, or do you mean they're
poll watchers?
Yeah. No. I mean an actual third party like this one based out of Warsaw, Poland, that goes into the United States just to be like, okay, well, let's monitor these elections just to make sure.
No, I mean, to Ben's point, though, right? Like, isn't that sort of a little bit, we're so great? Like, these things don't happen here, because I think that would be a conflict of interest to the election process. There's so many things you're not allowed to do at polls, like they're very particular about certain, campaigning and the like. I don't think there would have to be special dispensations made for an organization, quote unquote, doing that. Poll watchers, if I'm not mistaken, what's the deal with that, guys? Remind me. I don't think I've ever witnessed that practice, but don't they have to keep a distance of some kind, or they hang out outside the polling place? They're certainly not looking over people's shoulders whilst they vote.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a whole issue that was brought up with that thing with intimidation, right? Poll watchers being put in place as an intimidation tactic, potentially. Maybe not, but it certainly seems that way to me, at least from my perspective. I wonder what poll monitoring is like in another country where it is a third party coming through just to keep an eye on everything. And the point you made, Ben, like it could be some third party that is actually a part of the election that is doing it on purpose. I don't know. It just gives me a weird feeling, you guys, because it makes me want to look internally and just make sure we're actually good. I think the U.S. is good, but maybe that's just because I grew up saying the Pledge of Allegiance,
Mm-hmm.
And just to answer my own question, I guess poll watchers can be affiliated with any number of organizations, whether they be a political party or some kind of nonpartisan group. They also can conduct exit polls, which we know are really, important for gauging how an election is going, right, in advance.
I think they just have to be 100 feet back.
100%. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The idea of corruption here is worth asking. It's worth investigating. Completely agree with you, Tay. This may be an episode in the future. We do know that Vladimir Putin's polling numbers are through the roof. Who would have saw that coming? Unanimously loved by the nation of Russia.
Nothing weird there. He rides horses with his shirt off.
Yeah. He's a real stud muffin, that guy. We do know that there are international observers, to your question, Matt, that will, I guess they're not quite on the level of poll watchers all the time, but there are institutions and groups from other countries that will monitor U.S. elections. And it needs to happen. Elections do need to be monitored, hopefully by an objective third party. The problem is that a lot of those parties are not indeed objective.
Right? How do you get one? There was such a huge issue during the last presidential election in the United States, and there's about to be another one. It would be awesome if there was some kind of watchers of the Watchmen, as you said, Ben, that could just go, hey, guys, we got it. We're just going to make sure we're all good, and we're good. Oh, no, we have to do that one again. Sorry, y'all.
I wonder what would happen, though, if some member state of NATO came out and publicly said, or like the United Nations said, this election has too many serious problems and we need to just do a take two, reset, vote again. America would not have it at all.
I know. You're right. Especially if it was like a NATO or some other group that we're supposed to say, okay, we'll do what you say. Oh, man. Oh, well, this feels like a conundrum to me. We need people like Tigray out there figuring out what to do next. Right.
And congratulations on the PhD, Tay.
Absolutely.
Heck yeah. And shout out to Professor Daniela Dono. That's awesome. I looked at her about page on her own website. It's very interesting stuff. And there's a whole book that we can look into, guys.
The Cyprus research is fascinating.
Very cool. All right. Well, thanks so much, Tigray. We are going to jump to another piece of a listener mail, but we'll be right back with more messages from you.
And we have returned with listener mail. This particular missive comes from Cool Guy. Big fan of Cool Guy. Let's just jump right into it. This is a fun one. Howdy, gentlemen. I've been a huge fan of you guys for years now and always wanted to reach out but never had anything to say. So glad you finally did, Cool Guy. I was scrolling through the internet when I stumbled upon a hole. Mel's hole, to be exact. Who is this Mel, you may ask? That's not in the email. I was just curious if you guys have ever heard of it and what are your thoughts? I'm going to attach a link to a YouTube video because it's like actually super gnarly. Cool Guy. I appreciate your podcast and can't wait to hear your thoughts. P.S. I apologize if I misspell this, which he does, but Noel's evil voice definitely is sounding like the Killing Joke Joker. What is my evil voice? I love it. I got to know. Let us know, Cool Guy. I hope he's not saying that I sound evil all the time. Apparently, I put on a bit of an evil patois at times.
Let's do a test. Say something really evil in your evil voice.
Murder most foul.
There we go. Yeah, I think that's what he's talking about.
Okay, cool. He spells my name Noel, though, like the grassy knoll, which I get a lot. And I guess that makes sense considering, the nature of the podcast. So I do not begrudge you that, Cool Guy. But Mel's hole, y'all, This is actually pretty prescient because we may well have a full episode coming up on mysterious holes, and we're going to try real hard not to giggle like little schoolgirls throughout that one. But yeah, this actually kind of ties back around to an episode of a show that's in some ways adjacent to our show, at least in the sense that it's on our network, the iHeart Podcast Network, Coast to Coast AM. And if I'm not mistaken, this story first surfaced in the 90s. And there's a real cool article. You guys remember IFL Science? We used to have a dirty word in it. Well, it's still around. Holly Large is kicking it as their resident hole expert. And the headline to this piece is Geologically Impossible, the strange story of Mel's supposedly bottomless hole. Essentially, what the gist is that in February of 1997, a fellow calling himself Mel Waters called into the late night conspiratorial talk show Coast to Coast. This is back when Art Bell was still at the helm there. And this guy, guys, I've never really spent any time with Coast to Coast. Is this pretty common? Like folks just calling in and telling their wild stories? Is that sort of the format?
Yes.
Okay, got it. So that makes sense. So this guy had a bit of a doozy. He calls in and says that on his property, around 14 kilometers, 9 miles to the west of Ellensburg, Washington state, there was once a giant hole that, according to this fellow Waters, had no end, was an endless, bottomless pit. He talks about how locals from the area would throw away their garbage into the hole pretty regularly, and one might ask, well, then at what point wouldn't that hole just start to fill up and overflow with nasty waste? Apparently, it never did, because he goes on to talk about how he went to literally try to get to the bottom of this thing, and he took a real large amount of fishing line. I'm no fisherman here, no angler, but I think a big old reel of fishing line probably comprises quite a lot of length, and he had to go through several of them, so he claimed, to get to still not the bottom. He exhausted, I believe, 3 reels that he had brought, constituting around 80,000 feet, 24,000 meters.
Wow.
So yeah, without still, by the way, reaching the bottom of this chasm. The IFL Science article then goes on to talk a little bit about geology. So let's not be the spoilers quite yet. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the lore behind Mel's hole. Waters also goes on to claim that some government agents of unknown origin or affiliation, let's just call them general spook type individuals, showed up and shut down the area, claiming that it had been the site of a plane crash, an official, government vehicle, perhaps some kind of spy plane, perhaps. Didn't really go into detail. So they shut it down, and then he claims that they essentially forced him to lease his land to the government, which they paid him, obviously for. And he supposedly was able to use that money paid to him by the government to move to Australia, which sounds nice. Probably got some pretty deep holes out there Australia way as well. So some of the properties of this hole that he described were things like bringing animals back from the dead is one that strikes me. I'm a big, fan is the right word. Pet Cemetery I find to be one of the most nihilistic and upsetting pieces of fiction ever penned. I think it was so effed up that, talking like Jojo Siwa over here, that Stephen King kept it in a drawer for many years.
He says it's the novel that scared him the most.
That's right, yeah, because it was also, I think, when he was in the deepest throes of his cocaine addiction. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but it certainly is a really, really, really dark and sinister novel about a place in, of course, Maine, where is supposedly an Indian burial ground on the other side of what would become a child's kind of cemetery for burying dead pets. And when you bury them on the other side, the Micmac burial ground, I believe is what they call it, the First Nations tribe that is depicted in the book, and in the film, then it comes back, but it comes back bad. It comes back.
The soil is
sour. Yes, boy, is it ever. Fred Gwynn for the win. Don't go into the road, Lois. Lois. I mean, God, talk about what a bummer. And then that guy meets a real gnarly end at the hands of a spoiler for a probably 30-year-old piece of fiction at this point. They bury a small child in the pet cemetery, and it comes back and slices old Herman Munster up with a scalpel and eats his Adam's apple out of his throat. Scared the crap out of me. You guys have a memory of seeing a movie that was above your pay grade for the age you were, and it kind of wrecked you a little bit? That was that for me. Event Horizon as well, because I would argue Event Horizon was irresponsibly marketed. I thought that was going to be a fun space romp, and it had all kinds of weird, horrible Hellraiser surgery, clawing out people's eyes kind of stuff in it. That one wrecked me, but Pet Sematary really did a number on me. So guy claims that a local threw his dog in there and saw it later shambling around with another hunter, and it didn't recognize him. Okay. Also claims that he had heard tale of people taking radios, holding it up around the ridge, which I believe the mouth of this cavern here, this thing he claimed to be around 9 feet wide, the mouth of this hole, only to pick up music from the past. Broadcasts from yesteryear. There are claims of transmutation of substances, the kinds of things that you would only hear in tales of alchemy, of like turning, brass into gold or what have you. Metals, specifically said, held near the hole would morph into other substances. And you guys are already kind of getting the gist. This is starting to take on urban lore, urban legend type status real quick. My favorite one was the story of like somebody lowered like a pack of lifesavers down there. Maybe not my favorite one. And this is pretty smart, hoping they would reach water, and then it would cause, you know what? I think it was the fishing line. It had lifesavers on the end of it. And it was supposedly if it hit water, then it would dissolve, but it never did. So that's one thing. And the last thing was sounds, black beams emitted from this thing. And supposedly the sounds of some sort of sinister creature, lurking within. This is very Cthulhu-esque kind of stuff. So before we try to debunk it, or at least talk to some folks that maybe will try their hand at that, this is cool stuff. It's very interesting. It's the stuff of probably coast to coast, vibes. It seems to me to have clearly been an influence in the television series. I think it's called Outer Range, starring Josh Brolin, about a mysterious hole that is some sort of portal. It would have to be, because it's definitely a rural kind of setting and similar kind of mysteries surrounding this hole. But how does this hit you guys? Do you have any analogs for this, or has you guys heard of this story?
Yeah, have heard of it. In full disclosure, I am one of the executive producers for a lot of Coast to Coast AM podcast. However, I didn't put my thumb on the scale of this exploration of mysterious holes. It is startling. I think one of the things we have to remember, if we're hearing this and we're saying, I'm a skeptical person, we have to remember that the vast majority of cavern systems on this planet remain unexplored. Like right now, it is totally possible, not plausible, but totally possible that there is an entire region of the world, subterranean region that we do not understand. Noel, for the case of Mel Waters in particular, if I recall correctly, we just know that the guy called himself Mel Waters. We don't know if that's his real name.
Further exploration of into this dude revealed that no such individual existed by that name. And he also referred to his wife, I believe, by name in the broadcast, who was affiliated with a university in the area. And the cross references of that name also led to bupkis when it came to, somebody that had been employed at this university. And sorry, my tabs are all askew, and I'm not getting the names quite right. Wait, here we go. This is Ellensburg, Washington, and Yeah, Kittitas County. Yeah, his wife, he claimed, worked at CWU, which I guess is Central Washington University. He named her, and no person of that name working at Central Washington University. So, yeah, 100%, Ben. Seattle's KOMO TV station did a piece on it on February 7th of that year. This conversation on Art Bell definitely hit the small community pretty hard. For whatever reason, though, the exact location is very vague, and no one seems to have been able to actually find the thing. And for a giant bottomless hole, that seems a little sketchy. But again, the guy said that the government basically co-opted it, and one would maybe, if we were to believe that line of thinking, maybe filled it in or camouflaged it or whatever in some way.
Well, we are talking about only a 9-foot diameter hole, right?
That's right.
That's, I don't know. Imagine if you're looking out on this like vast landscape where there's not really much there that does have ups and downs to it, right? The elevation shifts a little bit. It'd be pretty hard, I think, to find just a hole that's that small.
Yeah. Also, didn't this person make repeat appearances on Coast to Coast?
He did, yeah, as recently as 2000, is my understanding. And another person who kind of entered the chat when the story first, kind of hit the airwaves and then the TV, was a guy who actually did work at CWU, a geologist for the Department of Natural Resources by the name of Jack Powell. And he was very skeptical. He kind of even referred to the Art Bell show as being all about UFOs and Sasquatches in kind of a dismissive way. And he had this to say when interviewed by filmmakers. Jack Powell, a geologist with the Washington State Department of Natural Resources, he said, geologically and physically, it's not possible for a hole to be that deep. It would collapse into itself under the tremendous pressure and heat from the surrounding strata. He believes that the legend sparked from the existence of a local gold mine shaft that he remembered from being a boy, that had its entrance in a local field with a shaft of around 27 meters or 90 feet deep, which is certainly deep, but not what one might call bottomless, or like a portal into the unknown. Waters does reference something called the Kola Super Deep Borehole on the Kola Peninsula in northwestern Russia, which is a hole it's a project, I guess, a dig that spanned from May 24th, 1970 to after the collapse of the Soviet Union, which saw the digging of the deepest hole ever, which is 40,000 feet below the surface. That's a pretty deep hole there. It's still half what this hole is purported to have been. And there was another kind of point of reference. Let's see. Yeah, the Russians, he said, drilled the deepest hole, 40,230 feet in 1989 is when that wrapped. He said, if they had said over the radio it was on the north side of the valley, well, I might have stayed with the program for a while longer. I was thinking the hole I knew about was somehow being made into Mel's hole. And he's referring to some areas of the eastern Washington, region, the lower Kittitas County and Manastash Ridge specifically. He says geologically and physically, it's not possible for a hole to be that deep because of the reasons we mentioned earlier. He said whoever Mel was, he probably knew about the hole in northwest of Ellensburg that's on private land, fenced with barbed wire, and is not too far from state DNR lands. I suppose this Mel Waters, he says, used the real hole as a kind of inspiration for making up this mysterious one in Manastash Ridge. Cool idea. I really get it, and it's like, I know that Art Bell and Coast to Coast, certainly there's stuff that gets talked about on there that, has grains of truth, like a lot of the stuff we talk about on this show. But this one does maybe seem like someone was trying to get some airtime and created a story that was maybe rooted in a grain of truth with this other hole, but then kind of went a little bit, he jumped the shark a little bit in terms of some of the details. What do you guys think?
I think we should all watch Outer Range. I think we've talked about it before on the show.
It's a good show.
Really
I like it a
interesting.
lot. Very Twin Peaksy. I really dig it. I like the weird evil kind of rancher guy who's always singing like to his son. Like he bursts into song all the time, and I can't remember the character's name. It's been a minute, but I think there's another season of that too. But I did watch every episode of the first season and enjoyed it very much. Ben, any other thoughts about Mel's Hole?
Oh, you know Mel? I'm kidding.
Yeah, definitely. Mel Torme. Is that what we're talking about? The old crooner.
Very much looking forward to our future subterranean exploration. It's very hold my beer of humanity to say how deep can we dig, and we will dig into that in a future episode. So thank you so much for writing in. What a fantastic suggestion.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, cool guy. We're going to take a quick pause, hear a word from our sponsor, and then come back with another one final for this evening's episode. Piece of listener mail.
And we've returned. Ben, I thought you were going to say hole my beer, as in like you just tossed it in.
This is why we hang out.
Yeah, maybe it would come out a different kind, right? Or
Are you guys talking about beers and butts?
No.
Always. If you look back over the course of this show, every episode in some way is about beers and butts.
Mm-hmm.
You know, think about it.
Dirty trucks.
We have a couple of pieces of correspondence here. This is something that is pretty serious. It's been on our collective mind for some time. Here is a piece of correspondence from our longtime conspiracy realist, Fiona. Fiona says, "Hi all. Very long-time listener here. I had never heard the term active clubs until today. I've missed some episodes recently, so not sure if you've covered these already. Fiona, we have yet to do so. And we're glad you brought this up." Fiona is quoting from a newsletter called The Real Intel. And Fiona quotes the following: "Active clubs are fraternal, white-only fitness groups that use physical fitness as a lifestyle draw to funnel men into white nationalism and into militant neo-Nazism. In addition to using fitness culture as a means of influence and recruitment, the fitness proposition of active clubs allows white nationalists to train for street violence. They were started in January 2021 and use MMA-style training to train for what they claim is an upcoming race war. They're found throughout the U.S., Canada, Europe, and Australia. Canada has 22 known chapters, including a rare women-only chapter. They've spread fast and hard in an unprecedented amount of time by hiding in plain sight and making it easier to draw new members in." Let's pause there, peek behind the curtain. All of us are exploring physical fitness on our own as individuals. Have you guys ever heard of active fitness clubs?
Literally, Matt was talking about it earlier, and it sounded perfectly innocuous to me. But what you're describing doesn't.
Yeah, I've never seen one, and I'm right now searching for and failing to find like official websites of any of these things. All I see is links from Anti-Defamation League and a bunch of other groups talking about them.
Yeah.
But there's no like place online, I guess, where they exist.
Be. You know what I mean? You wouldn't advertise that. You would just have your gym's website. We want to recommend, first off, Fiona, thank you for the suggestion here. We want to recommend an excellent piece by Tim Dickinson, writing for the Rolling Stone, who says, quote, "This violence-ready militia is hiding in plain sight." And also Dickinson describes these active clubs as, quote, "who the Proud Boys wanted to be." Do you guys remember the Proud Boys debacle?
Unfortunately.
What? I wish we were video for this, because folks, you had to see Matt and Noel nod when we remember Proud Boys. Oh my gosh.
Well, yeah, we talked about them a while back.
Yeah.
Before they got involved with the January 6th thing. Is that the right date? That whole stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were one of those groups that seems like an interesting way for, especially like former soldiers or people who are no longer soldiers, to get together and have like a thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
A post deployment hang kind of thing, which is really important, actually. But it seems like it went a different way. I don't know. Like this whole defending the Constitution thing, no matter what, from like, there's something at the heart of it that seems like, okay, I get that. But then it just goes towards, I don't know how to even say it. Some often racism and terrible things.
Yeah, you can read reports from outfits like the Counter Extremism Project, or CEP, that describes these groups, this cottage industry of militia, as a backup standby army for what they envision as some sort of apocalyptic reckoning, right? Some sort of race war. They have been affiliated with groups like the Oath Keepers, right? And I'm sure there are some 1%er motorcycle clubs that might have a Venn diagram there. We do have to say, most importantly, one, this conspiracy does appear to be real. It may be an episode in the future. And two, I hate to say it, but hashtag not all gyms. Some people just like to go boxing. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, of course. Well, absolutely. Not all gyms, and also not all groups like that. I mean, it's so weird to me because do you guys remember early in the, especially Ben, early in the video days, when we would get reached out to sometimes by people who were like Oath Keeper kind of folks, I would say, right?
Sure.
Who have this mentality of, I am finished with my military service, but I'm dedicated to either the country or the human beings inside the country, right? So at least from what we saw from their writings, it's, I will protect the human beings who live in the United States from any enemy that tries to roll through here, right? Including
foreign or domestic. Yeah.
Exactly. Including if it's like a government that comes through or a tyrant comes through, I will defend the people around me, basically. Which, I don't know about you guys, that feels pretty noble to me, at least in theory, when you say it like that. But again, when you have a bunch of people who are like-minded in that way, and then there's a leader who maybe has some different kind of views, it's a slippery slope towards radicalization. So it's I don't know. I just want to put that out there because I know there are people listening, at least some people listening right now, that feel the positive parts of that, but hopefully aren't infected or influenced by the negative parts.
Dude, honestly, shout out to everybody doing reps as you're listening to the show. You know what I mean?
Getting swole out there.
Yeah, this also reminds me, to your point, Matt, this reminds me of Noel, an observation you made in a recent previous episode where you said, yeah, communism could be great if anybody actually did it, right? Because these theories, these grand ideas, in practice, they so often devolve into very different things. And when we're talking about active clubs, again, it's just like motorcycle gangs, a very small percentage of active clubs, or whatever you want to group them as, very small percentage of them are these white supremacists. But if you look at the origin story, as far as we can tell, it goes back to a guy named Robert Rundo, Rundo, operating out of Orange County, California, was attempting to launch an extremist network for some time. In 2017, he built something called the Rise Above Movement, or RAM. And it called itself like a top-notch MMA club. It was going to find the warrior spirit in you, and anyone could sign up as long as they were a dude and white. Little caveat there. He got into a lot of trouble. In 2019, this guy was charged with federal conspiracy to riot, incite violence, right? To try to create the race war, the same way that Charles Manson pushed his followers to enact Helter Skelter. And tune in for our Manson and CIA episode on the way.
There's some wild stuff in there, Ben, with the Manson CIA connections that I only just stumbled across recently. I can't wait to have that conversation.
Excited as well. Yeah, that's going to be a doozy, as you said. Federal prosecutors, when they charged Robert Rundo, the judge threw the case out just in March of this year, in 2024. And then another judge came back in and reinstated the case. If you want to learn more, check out the fantastic Guardian article summarizing this by Ali Winston. The headline is Jailed, Released, Jailed Again. Whiplash in a leading neo-Nazis legal case. It's strange, man. I don't know about this stuff. Have you guys ever entered into an organization or pursued some kind of hangout or fellowship only to find it was very different than what it presented itself as?
I think I mentioned to you that I had a brief period where I was hanging out with some Baha'i faith folks that, it has been lumped in with the C word, the cult, that is, not the other C word. I found it to be very friendly, kind of meet for dinner and like-minded folks just kind of talking. It's almost like a group therapy or like an AA meeting or something like that. I did get to a point where it felt a little weird or like it wasn't exactly what my wheelhouse is. But I never felt like I was being coerced into anything at all. But I did get to the point where I'm like, I don't think I am the same as these people, though they're very lovely people. And then I, gradually just sort of slow faded it. But it was, because of school friends of my kid, and no shade on any of those people. They're all really lovely people. Just, I just felt like I didn't really belong.
Yeah. For a while I was in this group. We would get together like once or twice a week, and we would all kind of sit together, listen to somebody talk, and we would sing songs together often, like repeat these words that were written down in this book we had. And then they tried to get me to drink blood and eat, human flesh. And
you had me.
They were called the United Methodist Church or something like that.
Yeah, I did that stuff too.
I'm just playing.
Cannibalism tells us that transubstantiation is like calling base in a game of tag. It's the good cannibalism.
I don't think transubstantiation counts as cannibalism. I think it's okay. I went to youth group too. I ate a lot of tacos. Didn't really eat any human flesh that I know
Technically
of.
a sandwich in Indiana.
Why am I so anti-taco as sandwich?
I don't know. Again, it's like the most conservative opinion I have ever heard.
I never really associated that with being one way or the other, politically speaking.
I like that you're a firebrand for it.
I think I just like being cantankerous about this one really pretty meaningless issue. I will die on this hill of beans.
And there are people who appear to have decided that they will die on this hill of white supremacy, right? Of active militias. One thing we need to understand in the larger context, going back to our earlier conversation in tonight's program about the importance of election monitoring, we see opportunities for conspiracy and we see opportunities for corruption. One very clever thing that the U.S. military does is rotate out its leaders, such that you are following a position rather than following a person, right? And this avoids the cultish riz that is created by the Mansons and the Jim Joneses and, I'll say it, the Castros. But the issue here is that the U.S. right now, the Anglosphere entire, is pretty concerned about the idea of this hidden column of successionist supremacist, and oftentimes you will hear references to groups like this in just passing, in like our conversations about attacks on power stations, right? On the very vulnerable U.S. infrastructure, we see again the shadow of these supremacists. It's a very old enemy, and it survives. And it's a very troubling conspiracy, in my opinion. Obviously, we don't co-sign this stuff. We think fitness is super cool, but we really appreciate you, Fiona, for reaching out because a lot of people don't know about this. Imagine you go to a gym, right? You got your New Year's resolution or whatever, and you're thinking, this is it. I'm going to learn MMA. I'm going to learn parkour. I've got my gloves. I got my weird little shorts or whatever. And then several months in, they start inviting you to a different sort of meeting. I don't know, like how How prevalent do you guys think this could be?
I don't think it's prevalent at all.
I think it must be
Because
a rarity, right?
I've seen a lot of MMA gyms. I've seen a lot of individuals who like study that kind of martial arts.
Mm-hmm.
And I've yet to meet somebody who crosses that, like goes into whatever that is, or at least openly, right? Maybe I have, and I just haven't had that conversation with them.
Yeah. Maybe they did a vibe check on you and they decided you weren't receptive, which I think is a good thing.
I doubt it, though. I don't know.
Well, they're out there, folks. And with this, we are going to call it an evening. We're going to dive into these stories in future episodes. Thank you to everybody who took the time to reach out and touch faith and contact us. If you would like to join the show in a future program, please come into our cult. It feels weird to ask people to contact us after we just talked about how fitness clubs will sucker people into evil things. But, find us online.
Oh, find us online, indeed. We exist at the handle Conspiracy Stuff on YouTube, where we have video content rolling out. I'm switching up the order this time. On X, FKA Twitter, and on Facebook, where you can join our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy. On Instagram and TikTok, we're Conspiracy Stuff Show.
You can find us by calling this number, 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, you've got 3 minutes. It's a voicemail system. Say whatever you'd like. Do give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your voice and name on the air. If you got more to say than can fit in that 3 minutes, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.